One of the things I would like to do is to try to work through a little bit of Homer's grammar and the reading of Homer's Iliad. To just say a few words before I start, I'm a retired seminary professor. My field was Hebrew Bible, and I have a number of inductive Hebrew and Greek grammars on YouTube, New Testament Greek, Koine Greek, and also Hebrew and Akkadian and other grammars that I've worked on. And when I did my academic work, I have a master's of theological masters in Koine Greek and also a THD in basically looking at biblical studies in Koine Greek as a minor. And then my MA and PhD studies, my PhD was in ancient Near Eastern languages in Hebrew, or Hebrew and ancient Near Eastern languages. So at this point in life, I'm retired, and I've decided to try to have a hobby. And one of the hobbies that I thought I would try to enjoy would be reading classical Greek and also eventually classical Latin. That was not part of my training. I'm not coming forth here or coming as an expert, as a classical scholar. My training, as I've said, was in Hebrew, specifically in biblical studies, but Hebrew and ancient Near Eastern languages. But what I'd like to do is to read slowly through a few lines of Homer's Iliad and learn as I go and also share with you what I'm learning. And maybe you would like to join this study with me. I know you can find Homer, I believe, on YouTube in the Greek to follow along. What I love to do is inductive grammar. That is what I do in Greek and Hebrew, New Testament Greek, Hebrew, and also in Akkadian, the Hammurabi's epilogue. We've done 21 or 20 chapters looking at Akkadian grammar. So I would like to tackle this, and if I miss some points, I'll try to correct them on the video or at the end of the video in the written portion. And if anyone's listening, have corrections you can make to me, I'd be happy to receive it. But I just want to keep growing in my knowledge. We're told that we should be lifelong learners. And the older we get, the more we need to continue to learn. I was reading Cicero concerning old age, and it was saying that there was a gentleman in his 90s that decided to learn to read Greek, classical Greek. So he's a few years older than I am, so I decided why not. So what I'd like to do is share with you what I've been studying. First of all, as a hobby, like I say, my main focus will be biblical languages. But I want to say a word about Henry David Thoreau. I appreciate Thoreau's thought. He talks about reading Homer. He says the student may read Homer or Aeschylus in the Greek without danger of dissipation or luxuriousness, for it implies that he in some measure emulate their heroes and consecrate morning hours to their pages. I don't know about the morning hours, but I agree with Thoreau on that. And he says, I thought this was good, the heroic books, even if printed in the character of our mother tongue, will always be a language dead to degenerate times, and we must laboriously seek the meaning of each word and line. And I thought this was a wonderful statement. And he says, the arduous student will always study classics in whatever language they may be written, and I certainly believe that, and however ancient they may be. That's why I enjoy Akkadian as well. So what I'd like to do is to go through this first part of Homer and a few lines and talk about the words and the grammar. And like I say, I enjoy inductive Hebrew grammar and Greek grammar, and so we'll be doing the same. I thought this was an interesting quote from Thoreau too, where he says, Homer has never yet been printed in English, nor Aeschylus, nor Virgil, works as refined, as solidly done, and as beautiful almost as the morning itself. And so I find this to be some very helpful statements about the need for classical learning that has become almost, it's almost disappeared in college studies today. It is interesting too that he makes another statement, Thoreau, those who have not learned to read the ancient classics in the language in which they were written must have a very imperfect knowledge of the history of the human race. And so I appreciate here what Thoreau has said. And by the way, I found these statements in Henry David Thoreau, Walden, and he lived from 1817 to 1862. And part of his work on Walden Pond, or Walden, dealt with reading and the importance of reading and of reading classical works. With that in mind, I would like to embark and begin to look a little bit slowly through some of Homer. Let me begin by saying I am going to use a text that is out of print but is in the public domain as I understand. And then I'm going to also use other books as to help me in my studies. And I'll share them with you. This is available on Google Books. It's called Classic Interlinear Translation, the Iliad of Homer, on the Hamiltonian method. And it was improved by Thomas Clark. It was published, by the way, initially in 1888 by the Charles de Silver and Son, later by David McKay in 1952. And as I said, this can be found under Google Books. It is public domain from what I was able to read on Google Books concerning it. So I'm going to start there. What it does, first of all, it will, in an interlinear way, it will have the Homeric text and an interlinear English translation. However, the English translation follows the order of English rather than the order of Homer and his poetry. And it makes it easier to pick up, I believe, the language. I would agree with this inductive interlinear methodology. However, I would then also like to go back after doing this for a few lines and then go back and look at Homer's Greek itself, because often he'll have a word at the beginning of a phrase, let's say, where it won't fit in the English order. And it'll be there for emphasis. And we miss that if we don't read the original Homeric poetry itself. But I would like to blend both methods somehow and see how it goes. And it's certainly helping me. And I hope it helps someone else. So we begin with, let me just say this too, right before I start reading. A couple books that have helped me, and I would suggest them, would be Homeric Greek by Clyde Farr, Pharr, revised by John Wright. I found that to be very good. He does really an inductive kind of grammatical study. I would also recommend Selections from Homer's Iliad by Benner, Benner. I find this to be a very good book, copyrighted in 1903. So he does a very good job giving an introduction and summarizing the background and giving almost like we could say a flow of thought of Homer. I would also like to recommend as a dictionary the Greek English lexicon Liddell and Scott, published by Oxford. There's the big one, and then there is the smaller one. And I have both, but I personally enjoy the abridged Liddell and Scott in this smaller one. It's easier to handle, it's easier to get around on. And then there is a Homeric dictionary as well. But I think Liddell and Scott, for most people, would serve well as a background. So I know you can find Homer all over the place on YouTube and the Greek. And so if you would like to follow along, and if you would like to follow in the book that I'll start with, that is the interlinear, it can be found on Google Books. And again, it's the classic interlinear translation, the Iliad of Homer. So let me start in the first part. And we begin with Aedatha ulamenen menin akileos pelia adao he ethike muria algia akaios de praeapsin palas epthemus psuchas cheroon. AD. Let me just stop there. What I'd like to do too is give a little vocabulary right before we start and then get into the reading. In terms of vocabulary, as we're beginning the first few lines of Homer, some of the most important words, and I get this list also from Homeric Greek by Farr, and that is we have Eis or Eidos, which is Hades, the god of the lower world. Algos, meaning grief or pain. Achilles or Achilleus, Achilles. Daitos would be feast or banquet. Zeus, Dios, would be the father and king of the gods and men. And then we have hero, which is heros, which means hero. And Epthemus means mighty. Kuon, kunos, in the genitive meaning dog. Manus, manios, he, is wrath or fury. And ulamenos means accursed or destructive. And praiapto means hurl forward or send forth. And tithemi means to put or actually to place. So with that basic summary of vocabulary, let me just start reading. First of all, when you look at the first 7 lines, it begins with "Sing, O Muse, of Achilles' wrath, which brought sorrow and death to the Achaean camp. And this, by the way, is found, this wonderful summary in Binner, as he begins to summarize the first 7 lines. So we begin, and I'm going to, again, go back and read it and talk about, just briefly, about the grammar. Aede tha'a, sing, O goddess. Notice aede is the imperative, present imperative of edo, meaning to sing. So sing, O goddess, the destroying anger, ulemenein menin. Let me just say this too, that when you read the classical Greek, there is a hexameter. And that's, you can find that on the internet, on YouTube, where people much more skilled in reading than I would ever be in classical Greek are reading it. And that'll give you an idea. It's basically each, can I say, line will have a long vowel and 2 short, or sometimes it'll be 2 long. And it's sort of like music. It'll go, it'll have an emphasis, da, 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 something like that. And again, you can hear that online, and it's all over, I think to a large degree, all over on YouTube. So we begin with Ede, which is from Edo, meaning to sing. It's a present imperative. Second masculine singular, sing, or I should say present imperative, addressing Tha'a, the goddess. So sing, O goddess. Tha'a is the muse that will help bring this song together. Ulamenein is a participle, a masculine participle, and it is functioning here adjectivally with menin, meaning anger. So sing, O goddess, we could say the destroying or pernicious anger. And notice here in this form, ulamenein, we have a participle, a feminine singular participle, meaning destroying, or from the root to destroy, alumai, to destroy. So sing of the destroying or pernicious anger, menin, of Achilles, which will be the theme of this introduction. Menin means anger, and Achilleos is Achilles, of Achilles. Peliadeo, son of Pelus. Achilles was the son of Pelus. He etheke muria elgia Achaios. Which place, notice etheke is from tithemi. It's the aorist indicative active, 3rd person singular from tithemi, which place muria algeta, that is numerous woes. And muria means numerous or innumerable, and algeta means woes. Achaios, to the Achaeans. So as a result of what has happened here and the anger of Achilles, this eventually brought numerous woes to the Achaeans, Homer is saying. And then de praiapsin palas epthemus psuchas cheroon iddi, that is, and prematurely sin. Notice praiapsin is the aorist indicative active, 3rd person singular from praiapto, to send forth or to hurl. Palas Ephemus, many brave souls of heroes. So Palas Ephemus Psuchas Heroon Aidi. In other words, sent forth many brave souls of heroes to Hades. Notice here we have again what has happened as a result of Achilles' wrath, and many brave souls were sent to Hades, and this is the god of the underworld. It's interesting, when I think of Hebrew, we have Sheol, which is a way of describing the underworld, where the souls were seen in the Hebrew Bible to go in this kind of, can I say, flu-like existence, whether you were a righteous person or not. Everyone went to the underworld, so it was not a pleasant thought to die and go there. So we go on, and made them praise. Detuke autus eloria kunisen, made them praise for dogs. Notice tuke is your imperfect indicative active third person singular, which means to make, and so was making them to be praised. Kunisen means for the dogs. To die and to not have a decent burial was the worst thing that could ever happen. And this is what Homer is saying is happening as a result of the anger and what has occurred. And then we go on, tepasin oionoisin, and to all the birds of prey. Notice pasin oionoisin means birds of prey or birds. So all the birds. But debule dias etele eta. But the will of Zeus, Deus, was being fulfilled. Eteleote. And by the way, this is the imperfect indicative passive from teleo, was being fulfilled. And then we go on, ex hu de ta prota, out of or from what time? Out of, the preposition could be rendered from or what, and then who, what time indeed, de, da prota, and then we have at first or firstly, te atreides. Firstly, both the son of Atreus, which would be Agamemnon, and notice Atreides is your genitive singular, the king of men, or men of men, Onyx Andron, the king of men, and divine Achilles, Kaidias Achilleus Erisante, and divine Achilles having contended. And notice erizo means to contend, and diestaten, and by the way, this is a dual form, a participle, nominative masculine plural from erizo, having contended, stood apart. And here we have diastaten, an aorist, third plural, they stood apart. In other words, what he's saying, is my understanding, is the will of Zeus is being fulfilled in what's happening here. And out of what time? When did this first happen? When both the son of Atreus, Agamemnon, and the king of men, which would be Agamemnon, in apposition, by the way, to Atreides, and divine Achilles. When did this happen? That they contended erisante and stood apart. And he's going to then move on to discuss the cause. And that's when, of course, the priest came to try to get back his daughter. And Agamemnon was refusing, so Apollo sent a judgment, a plague of arrows, to judge the Achaean. Just to get a little bit of the background, in my understanding, this is from Farr on page 34. He writes these words: the son of Atreus is Agamemnon, commander-in-chief of the allied Greek military expedition against Troy, undertaken to bring Helen, wife of Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon. She had been stolen away from her home in Greece by Paris, the son of Priam, and was now in Troy. So this is a little bit about the background that Farr very wonderfully describes. The son of Atreus was well known to Homer's hearer, and so he writes it was not necessary to give his name Agamemnon, which is the one that we're talking about. But let me just stop here, and what I'd like to do is work through slowly, just for my own enjoyment, as well as hopefully it's helping others, look at the grammar. And what I've already put up one video where we did Homer in terms of the actual way it was written in the poetry. So we're using two things here. We're using the interlinear, which gives the English order, and then there is Homer. And if we read Homer, main and aedes a Peleada o Achilleus, we start with wrath. It's put forward for emphasis. We don't get this in the translation here, but sing the wrath, sing, O goddess, or muse, of the son of Pelos, namely Achilles, Ulamenen chemuria kaios alke etheken, that is, of the destroying wrath. And notice Ulamenen is put forth for emphasis again in this line. So that we would miss in the other translation, but I think the other is easier to read, at least for me, to get the vocabulary, and then come and look at the actual poetic reading of Homer. So which he placed myriads of woes to the Achaeans, and then palas diphthemus pluchas aedi praet apsin, and hurled forth many souls to Hades, heroon, and that's beginning a new line with heroon, emphatic again, of heroes. Autus de eloria tuca kunisin, that is, and made them spoils, was making them spoils for the dogs. Oionoisin tedaita, and birds, again, emphatic, feasts for birds, feasts. Dias de teleata boule, and the will of Zeus was being accomplished or fulfilled. Exhudeta prota diastatein erisante, and that's where we have out of which time. Firstly, were these two, having contended, stood apart. And then he names it Atreides, the son of Atreides de Annex Andron kai Dias Achilleus. That is, the son of Atreides, the son of Atreus, the king of men, which would be Agamemnon, and godlike Achilles. So here we see where the muse is encouraged to sing of the wrath which brought sorrow and death to the Achaean camp. So what we've tried to do, and I'm learning as I go along with all of you, is to read it in the interlinear first, in the normal English reading. And that is very helpful to me. And I appreciate the work that was done a long time ago by Thomas Clark, as well as the called the Hamiltonian system. And I like it for learning to read classical Greek. And then going back to the order that was written in Homer himself, or by Homer himself. Let me just say here again, the hexameter is something that you would want to study. That's not, again, it's all brand new to me. Main and a desa pe le del Achilleos. The last two are called spondaic or spondaic. Spondaic, that is two long sounds. So there's 6 beats to a line. And again, there's people with much more knowledge than I have to read that. I am not that familiar with the way the poetry is actually read. My main concern here is, first of all, to master as best we can, or to learn the vocabulary and the grammar, and then later on to be able to read it fluently in hexameter meter. So when I'm reading it, I'm just going to read it like I would read Koine Greek, or just reading it, and that's the way I would read the little text that we're using, which would be a classic interlinear translation. So let me stop there, and I'm hoping, at least I'm enjoying this. I hope someone has some benefit out of it. Thank you very much for listening.